Oh, welcome to Stillspeakpod. This is episode 5 of my Kaitlyn Conley series. It's been a while since episode 4 because we got sidetracked. We got sidetracked by the Murdaugh family unraveling and then the case of missing Gabby Petito. So we took a bit of a detour. There's just not enough time in a day, right? So while the FBI continues to find Brian Laundrie, we're going to get back to this for right now. Kaitlyn's story comes to my mind quite often. It's just something about it that just bugs me. And I feel a great sadness for Kaitlyn Conley. I can't put my finger on why, other than just that it doesn't seem right that the motive the prosecution had given at her trial, just doesn't add up for me at all. And it's why I wanted to bring some coverage to her story. If you didn't see the last 4 episodes about Kaitlyn Conley, I highly suggest you go listen to those first so you know what we're talking about. And in the last 2 episodes, we broke down Adam Yoder, which is the son of the victim, Mary Yoder, and his testimony during Kaitlyn Conley's first court trial. And then we compared it to the second court trial testimony. And Adam also dated Kaitlyn Conley, and she worked at his parents' chiropractic clinic. And we're now going to cover his father, William, otherwise known as Bill Yoder, which was Mary's husband. And the reason why we're going over these 2 men in particular is because both of these men were given immunity during a grand jury hearing. And what's insane about it is that both men had motive in the case of the death of Mary Yoder. In my opinion, far more motive than Kaitlyn Conley. And Mary Yoder died in July of 2015. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the first trial. And then in the next episode, we're going to go to the second trial. And then we're going to compare. We're going to do, okay, well, in this one he said this, and in that one he said that, just like we did with Adam Yoder. So it starts off with any person who takes a stand. They start asking, basic questions like his age and name and kids' names and their ages, and then about his career and his work experience, etc. At the time of the first trial in the spring of 2017, Bill was 71. His children with Mary were 39, 36, and 26. So that would make them 43, 40, and 30 now in 2021. And at the time of Mary's death, they would have roughly been 37, 34, and 24. Mary was 60 years old at the time of her death. She had turned 60 in March, and she died in July. And Bill turned 70 right after her death. And the couple had been married for 37 years. And Bill was a chiropractor just like his wife. They actually went to school together and started a chiropractic clinic. And he was a chiropractor for 27 years. And he retired soon after her death. And prior to that, he was a philosophy professor at a few universities. And Bill was asked if the chiropractic clinic had any staff besides him and Mary, and he said yes, just some, a few office employees, and one at one point would have been Kaitlyn Conley, which again was Adam's, girlfriend, ex-girlfriend. They had a very on-again, off-again type of relationship, and even at one point prior to Kaitlyn, Adam Yoder actually worked in the office as well. And they started to ask Bill about his work schedule, and they tried to get an idea of Mary's routine, which led into what Mary usually did for food on the days that she worked half day and then the days that she worked full day. And basically, what did she eat for lunch usually? And he said that occasionally she would bring in something like a salad, but most often she would make a protein shake. Now, this protein shake is a big piece of this story because the prosecution is trying to claim that in order to kill Mary, Kaitlyn Conley poisoned her protein shake at the office the day that Mary fell very ill before she had died 2 days later. So he's basically saying that, yeah, she typically would just drink a protein shake, sometimes a salad, but not often. And to remind you of this, because it's been a while since we did the last episode, Bill Yoder dated, or is dating, I'm actually not even sure if they're still together at this point, they may be, but dated Mary's sister. So this would have made him be dating his sister-in-law after Mary's death. And several claimed to have seen them together and kissing prior to her death, and there even was several signed witnesses' statements saying such. One actually took the stand and said such, but the sister and Bill were both adamant that they did not start dating until after Mary's death. And by November of 2015, so under 4 months after Mary's death, Bill Yoder had called a meeting with his adult children to let them know about his relationship with their aunt. So, if they started dating after, things moved rather fast for him to now be telling his children 4 months after their mother's death that he's dating their aunt, right? So, and this is obviously awkward for her family, Mary's family, right? Because he was married to Mary for 37 years, and now he's, dating her sister. It's awkward. It's weird. And during Adam's testimony, he really didn't think it was a big deal. He really didn't. He didn't seem to care at all. They even asked him, you didn't care? And no, he didn't. Typically, a child, no matter how old they are, gets very upset if a parent moves on so quickly after another parent's death. But, he didn't, and it's a little peculiar. It's not totally suspicious, because everybody grieves differently and everybody views death differently. However, it's just not common to see a child not care about that. I remind you of that because Bill was asking what type of relationship Mary and he had before her death. And he said it was wonderful. It was better than it ever was. It just seemed to be getting better every day. We just loved being together. Those were his exact words. Not as dramatic as I just said it, but I say it like that because it's hard to believe that a couple married, 37 years, had financial issues and 3 children together, and they had this clinic, which I'm sure caused conflicts at time, right? It's a business. It usually does cause that kind of issue. And so, I don't know. And then, to claim that you had this wonderful marriage and that it's never been better, especially in the context of knowing that less than 4 months after she died, you're already in a serious relationship, and not just any relationship, but a relationship with her sister. It's just, I don't know. And I said this before, I'm not buying it, Bill. I'm just not buying it. I wish he would have been a little bit more honest here to make it seem like the relationship was the best it ever been. I don't know. I guess maybe, but I don't know. Not in my opinion. So Bill was asked, you mean in 2015 it was wonderful? And Bill's like, yeah, the whole year of 2015. So, mind you, she died in July, so it wasn't a full year. It was only 7 months, but he's claiming, it was in the whole year of 2015. And he goes on to claim that they had a European trip planned from September 5th to October 5th. And he had already purchased the plane tickets, and they had booked some of their hotel reservations prior to her death. Obviously, since Mary died in July, they never did make it on this trip. I'm unsure if anyone, like investigators, had actually looked into Bill's claims of them going on this European trip. He was then asked on Monday, July 20th, 2015, if Mary had breakfast before leaving work, and Bill said that he doubted it because she hated eating first thing in the morning. He also said that she was usually in a rush, so they didn't have breakfast together often, and he worked out and kissed her goodbye on the way out the door. This is the day that Mary fell seriously ill. And the questions continued, and Bill was asked what time Mary usually got home on Mondays. And he said about 5:30 or 6, and that she would call on her way so he can get dinner ready. He said this particular Monday when she fell ill, she called and she didn't sound good at all. She didn't know what was causing her to feel so ill, but that she just knew she needed to get home as soon as possible. He said that she got in around 6:45 or 7, which is later than she normally gets in, and that she walked right in and went straight to the bathroom, according to Bill, for a very long period of time. And when she emerged from the bathroom, she did not look good at all. Mary wanted to sleep on the couch, according to Bill, and the next morning she was worse. So at that point, their daughter, who is a medical doctor, was contacted by Bill to ask her what they should do, and ultimately it was decided to go to the ER. Bill drove Mary there and was with her there during the whole day, through a series of battery of tests. And around 6 p.m., they decided that they wanted to admit Mary for the night and to figure out what was going on, because the tests weren't really giving them an idea of what it could be other than some serious, stomach bug. So about midday, he left the ER, Bill, because he claims that Mary wanted him to pick her Advair up from their home. And when he got back with the Advair, she was doing a breathing treatment, so he just put it in the room. And this Advair is important because the free Kaitlyn Conley website says that Mary's levels for the colchicine, which ultimately we find out killed her, the level was so high that it seems that she had to have been dosed again while in the hospital, and the only person who was with her on this day would have been Bill. And it alleges that this colchicine basically could have been put in the Advair, because the medicine inside of the disc that you get is a white powdery substance, just like colchicine is. So Bill says that when he got there, Mary was dozing in and out of sleep, and at one point she had asked him to now get her contacts and her contact case and her glasses, and that when he went home to do that, he had spoken to his daughter, and she said, why don't you get some clean underwear and slippers and sweatpants? So he said he left around 7 or 8 p.m. to go grab those items. So this was 2 trips back home in a very short period of time. He said that Mary also wanted cough drops because her throat was bothering her from all the puking. So he stopped at a drugstore and arrived back to the hospital with the items around 8:30 p.m. And he claims that he was going to stay the night with Mary, but she insisted that he go home because he was going to cover her patients the next day. So he headed home around 9 p.m. And at this point, he was asked where Adam was this day, and it was disclosed that Adam was in Long Island with his older sister, which Adam also disclosed in his testimony. And Bill was communicating with his daughter about her mother because she's a doctor, and she was the one passing the info on to Adam, in layman's terms, basically. So anyway, Bill said he got home, he got ready for bed because Lee normally worked half days on Wednesday, but with Mary being so sick and admitted to the hospital, obviously he was going to have to work the full day and see all her patients, including his own. And this sticks out to me because they owned the clinic. And he could have rescheduled all the patients, especially since he had no idea when she'd be discharged. You would think that, he would clear the day out so he can be on standby to go get her or just go be by her side. I mean, they owned it. It wasn't like just a job where you have to go and show up, right? If your wife's sick, you're not going to call out of work. That's not how you normally work like that, But I just think it's odd, He was even asked, did you know when she'd be discharged? And he was like, well, the next day or Thursday. So it's like, you knew she was going to be discharged. Why didn't you just call off the patients for the day and reschedule them? But he didn't. So then Bill was asked if they had a hard line, which I thought was weird. They meant landline, but they called it a hard line. I've never heard it referred that way, but I knew what they meant, landline, like a house phone. And he said, yeah. And do you have a cell phone? Yeah. And he claimed that he did not sleep with either phone in his bedroom. I don't know about you, but this is something else I find hard to believe, because back when everybody had house phones, which like little to nobody has anymore, you usually had one in the kitchen area, in your master bedroom, and then like one in like your den or your family room, like the area that you hung out the most. So the fact that they had a landline, but they didn't have the landline in the bedroom is just, I don't know, strange. And if you think about it further, they had adult children, right? And you never stop being a parent. When you have an adult child, you're constantly worried about them. And Adam was only 24 at the time. And he had a lot of issues, Adam. We discussed that already. And so you would think they would keep a phone in their room in the event of an emergency when something happens to one of their grandchildren or their adult children, or Adam, since he was a college student, he had a host of issues they were aware of. I don't know. I just find it hard to believe that they wouldn't have a phone in the bedroom when they had a landline. And I know a lot of people use their cell phones at night to help them fall asleep. I do. And I mean, there's even jokes about this in the form of memes on Facebook. Like you're scrolling on your phone to go to sleep, and you wake up in the middle of the night, you check your phone again. Now, Bill is much older, but it still seemed kind of odd to me that he wouldn't have kept his cell phone in the room with him, especially with the wife in the hospital. So he didn't have his landline in the room, and he didn't have his cell phone with him in his room. And he explained that a few months prior, Mary moved their quote-unquote charging station, whatever the heck that means, out of the room. I know most people just have a cord and, the port and put it in the wall. That's it. I know they sell charging stations, but I don't know. And then again, it was 2015, so maybe, they had one of those original charging station dock type things. Who knows? And the reason for this was that they supposedly had her sister, who had psychiatric problems, texting them for an hour or so at night around 3 or 4 a.m. And so it would make the phone, beep and light up. So Mary decided to move it out of the room. Now, there's a way to solve that without having to move the entire charging station out of the room, or to move the phone or leave the phone out of the room. You just put your display level down, or you put the screen down on a table or counter or a nightstand. And of course, you turn off all notifications, ringer, and vibration. So, why not just do that so it didn't beep and light up, and instead of just moving the whole charging station out? But this is his explanation. We don't know if this is even true. This is according to him. And to add to that, if the sister was having psychiatric problems, and would be calling to talk or need help, you would think that Mary would want to have her phone nearby. Even though it's a pain in the butt, it's still her sister, and if she needs help in some way, you would think that she would. But that's Bill's claim. So he admits that he didn't have his phone with him when he went to bed. Neither phone, neither the landline or the cell phone. And And he said, I thought it was routine that they were keeping Mary overnight, so I didn't feel like I needed to keep the phone with me. But guess what happened? At 5 a.m., he wakes up to banging on his door. And he goes downstairs and he opens the door, and guess who's there? 2 state troopers. They shared a message with him, and they left. And when they left, the first thing he did was call the hospital, because they had been trying to get a hold of him. Let that sink in. The hospital called his numbers to no avail, and they couldn't get in contact with Bill, to the point they had to send 2 state troopers to his door to get a hold of him. His wife was in the hospital. You're going to tell me he didn't hear the landline, he didn't hear his cell phone, and it took state troopers coming to the home for him to wake up? Really? I don't know. I know older people. They're light sleepers. They don't typically fall into very deep sleep. Okay, so I don't know. I don't know, Bill. This is one of those I don't know Bills. And so after he hung up with the hospital, he headed there, and then he went to the ICU, because that's why they were calling. They were calling to let Bill know that Mary had gotten worse and that she was now in the ICU. He arrived around 5:45 or 6 a.m., and when he got there, the doctor wanted to speak with him first, where they explained that she went downhill rather fast. When he got in to see Mary, she was strapped down, tubes everywhere. She was conscious, but he said she looked terrified. And Bill then called his daughter again for her to speak with the doctors, because she is a medical doctor. But here's the thing. Bill had 2 doctorate degrees. He was also a professor, he was an author, and he was a chiropractor for 27 years. And despite what so many want to say, and out there they call chiropractors quack, they actually go to school for a really long time, okay? So they know the body pretty dang well. And so why couldn't he speak to the doctor? Like, you really needed your daughter to? But that's what he did. I don't know. I feel like it's your wife. You're going to act like you don't know what the doctor's saying and you don't understand, yet your work experience and degree and career, I just don't. Doctors know that most people don't really understand or know medical jargon type talk. So they usually do speak to you as clear as they could for you to understand. So I'm just like, okay, Bill, you really couldn't understand what the doctor was trying to say? It's also, important to remember this, because later we're going to discuss it again, but even after her death, the daughter, not Bill, was in contact with the medical examiner's office, and we talked about this when we talked about Adam's testimony. And Bill was asked if he had spoken to his daughter again after she spoke to the doctors, and he said he didn't know, but he thinks so. And this is also strange to me, because wouldn't you want to know from your daughter what the doctors were saying? Like, the whole point for her to talk to them, you're claiming, is because she's a doctor, even though you have 2 doctorates, Bill, but whatever. And so you would think that he would talk to her afterwards, right? Immediately afterwards, so she can translate to him what the doctor was saying if he truly didn't understand. And Bill said that he assumed that at this point Adam was still with his sister in Long Island. But he later learned that Adam had already headed back home, and this was so that he could stay with his mom at the hospital while his dad went to work at the clinic. Now, that was Adam's original motive, and he made that decision before he and Bill knew that Mary was in the ICU. So Bill, is assuming he's with the sister, but he's already back. But at this point, Adam didn't even know his mom was in the ICU. So Bill goes on to say that Mary coded 6 or 7 times that day, and he said they would be in the room with her, and all the monitors would go off, and the medical team would run in and usher them out. And then they would come out and they would say, we revived her, you can go back in. And Bill was asked who he meant by they, and he said him and Adam. Later, one of the daughters was there as well, and then later on, even more so, the oldest daughter had arrived because she had a 6-hour drive to get there. The time that Mary coded, which resulted in her death, the doctor came out after about 30 minutes saying something to the effect of, "Do you want to call it?" And Bill said, "I guess we all deferred to his daughter because she's the doctor." And they said, "Okay, let her die." So it kind of sounds like the oldest daughter, who's the doctor, made the final call. Now, her name's out there. If you want to look it up, go for it. It's in all the court documents and everywhere. The only reason why I'm not saying her name is because I just don't... Adam, we have to say, okay? Why? Because Adam's a very big part of this story. And so we got to mention his name. This daughter has children. And I'm just not comfortable with putting her name out there. I mean, like I said, if people really want it, they can look it up. I'm just not comfortable with that. I don't feel like dragging their names through everything. So I'm just always going to refer to her as the oldest daughter, and or just daughter, because I just want to respect that about them. So yeah, it sounded like the oldest daughter, the one that's the doctor, made the final call. So again, like, Bill didn't understand this enough to make the call as her husband for 37 years. Like, you couldn't even make that call without deferring to your daughter? Okay. Mary Yoder died at 2:54 p.m. with her husband and kids right outside her room, and many other family members in the waiting room who had been hanging out in there for some time. And Bill claimed that he actually didn't know that other family members were there in the waiting room, including Mary's 90-year-old mother. He said he had walked past the waiting room several times, and he didn't even look in there because he was not up for talking to anyone, which is a little odd because he's saying that he didn't know that anybody else was there, and then he said, "I walked past it, but I didn't look because I didn't want to talk to anybody." Well, you said you didn't know anybody was there, so who are you avoiding talking to? Odd. The family said their final goodbye to Mary, and after that, Bill says he walked out of the hospital into the sunlight, and the next thing he remembered that he was when he was sitting on his bed in the dark, crying and crying. And he said that his daughter told him afterwards that they had spoken for hours after they all went back to their family home, but Bill claims he doesn't remember any of that. Bill was asked if anyone worked the day Mary fell ill, and Bill said no, just Mary and Kaitlyn. And then he was asked how many patients Mary may have seen that day, and he guessed about 35 to 40. So that's a ton of people to come in contact with that day, and that also should include Bill, whom he, saw her that morning before she left for work, and who also saw her again in the evening. And he was the only one besides doctors to see her in the hospital all day on Tuesday. Mary Yoder's celebration of life was held on the 25th of July, so just 3 days after she died. And Bill claims to not really remember what time this celebration of life was held, but guessed about noon or 1. He said that he was afraid to come downstairs to even attend it because he could not face people. And I want to note here that Adam and his sisters, along with Kaitlyn Conley, are who planned the celebration of life for Mary Yoder. Bill said he stayed in the area the first week after Mary passed. He claims that there was a lot of legal things that needed to be taken care of. And I gotta wonder if one of those legal things was a life insurance policy. And he disclosed that, the day Mary died, they had approached him that an autopsy would need to be done. And Bill basically told him, well, sure, fine, go ahead. I want to know what happened. Bill then said his daughter, the same daughter, again, the one that's the doctor, had been in talks with the funeral home, setting things up, writing the obituary and stuff like that. And the next thing Bill says is odd. I guess some would speak, similar to this, depending on their beliefs about death. But he said the medical examiner released the body, and we discussed what was going to be done with it. It strikes me odd. I'm trying not to be too mean here to Bill, but I don't know. This is your wife for 37 years, and I know it's just her body, and again, depending on your beliefs, but the body and it as referring to the body instead of just saying her body, Mary, I don't know. Ultimately, Mary was cremated, and Bill claimed that this is what Mary wanted. So, this is fascinating, right? Because the eldest daughter is the reason that Bill even took Mary to the hospital that Tuesday. She was then the one who spoke with the doctors, not Bill. She was the one to make the final call to stop reviving her mother. She was the one who led the planning on the celebration of life for her mother. She was the one to speak with the funeral home and who wrote the obituary, and she was also the one in contact with the medical examiner's office. Her mother just died, and he is deferring almost everything about her death to his daughter. Now, she was older. She was about 37 years old at the time. But her mother just died. As her father, why are you deferring all these things to her? Really? Yeah, that was a long pause because I just think that's... Ugh. Anyways, Bill then had to address the elephant in the room, so to speak, and he was questioned about his relationship with Kathy, who is Mary's sister. He said that he met Kathy 40 years prior, not long after meeting Mary, and he also disclosed that Kathy's husband had died a year earlier, and that prior to his death that they had saw them multiple times a year, mostly holidays, and that the two couples were very close. Prior to Mary's death, though, they seen Kathy at their home for Mother's Day. And if you go back in the last 2 episodes, you will recall or see, that we already talked about Mother's Day. This is when Adam and his mother had an argument, and afterwards Adam basically told his mother that he didn't want to see her or his father as often anymore. They then saw Kathy again on June 20th and then again on June 27th at a pottery workshop that Mary had asked Bill to go with her to. And this workshop was near her sister's home, and so Mary decided to ask Kathy to meet up with them for this pottery workshop. So they saw Kathy 3 times in a short period of time right prior to Mary's death. And this is where it gets interesting. Bill was asked if he recalled seeing Kathy at the hospital the day that Mary died. And he said he has 2 memories. Okay? Now remember, earlier he said he didn't know that other family members had showed up to the hospital, right? And then he later learned this. But then he also said that he had walked past the waiting room, but he didn't look in there because he didn't want to speak to anybody. But it's kind of funny because the 2 memories he does have, both of those memories involve seeing Kathy. Convenient. So he says one time was because the sister with the psychiatric issues was causing a scene in the hallways, and a nurse had asked Kathy if she can get her and, get control of her. And another memory he had of Kathy at the hospital is when he was trying to hold it together for his kids. He claimed that their youngest daughter, had been shaking uncontrollably, and that Kathy had sat next to her, put her arms around her, and was comforting her. This would have been her niece. And Kathy's her aunt. And Bill disclosed that he asked Kathy at Mary's celebration of life if they can meet up and talk about the process of losing a spouse. He knew she'd been through it, and he wanted somebody that, wasn't going to just wish him well and understood what it was like. He then says that he went to Kathy's home on July 30th. That was 8 days after Mary's death. And they spoke for a few hours in her kitchen. So as a refresher, Mary got sick on July 20th, was in the hospital until the 22nd, and she died at 2:54 p.m. on July 22nd, 2015. Her celebration of life was on the 25th. On the 26th, Mary's body was released to the funeral home, and on the 30th, he was at Kathy's house when all his kids, including Kaitlyn, had went out to the oldest daughter's home in Long Island a few days before him. He went to Long Island and met up with them on the 1st of August. So Adam, Kaitlyn, and the other daughter went out to the oldest daughter's home in Long Island. Again, she has children, and one of her children has Down syndrome. So they seem to go to her house a lot. I could only assume because her daughter has special needs that it was just easiest for the daughter if people came to her home. So they went ahead of Bill. And so Bill was left at the home by himself. And during this time, he met up with their aunt, Kathy, at her home on July 30th. And he was in Long Island from August 1st until August 9th. And then Adam and Bill flew out to Santa Monica in California. And they were there for a week. Then they drove to another family member's home in Arizona. Adam then flew back home to New York on the 20th of August. And Bill flew back on the 24th of August to his daughter's home because his car was still there. He stayed there for about a day or so before going back home. Kaitlyn was with Adam in Long Island before they left for California. She continued to work at the practice while Adam and Bill were gone, while a temporary chiropractor was taking over for Bill. And she's the one who picked Adam up from the airport when he got back from Arizona. On September 17th of 2015, the medical examiner's office contacted, guess who? Bill's oldest daughter. And at this point is when they found out that Mary was killed by something called colchicine. We talked about colchicine a lot in the first 4 episodes. I'm not going to repeat all that. And Bill said, that they had that European trip planned in September from the 5th to October 5th. And that had been planned before Mary's death. And they were going to have somebody fill in for them during that trip. So this trip to Cali and Arizona sounds like it hadn't been planned prior to Mary's death. The same day he found out about the colchicine is when all of Mary's supplements at the home had been collected. They were collecting the supplements because they were looking for cross-contamination. Mary was into growing her own herbs, and she was into supplements and, natural type things. And so when colchicine came up, it was like, all right, well, this is poisoning. Maybe something she took had some type of contamination, which kind of reminds me of that whole debacle with the Tylenol years ago. Was it Tylenol? It might have been Advil. No, I think it was Tylenol. When all these people were dying, they figured out it was a lot number and all that. So basically they're thinking this is maybe something like that. So they wanted her supplements so they can test it for cross-contamination. But what's really interesting here is that investigators did not come to the home and collect them. Why not? They had just determined that it was an intentional murder and that she was poisoned. They did not believe that she killed herself with this colchicine. So you would think, especially given that Bill's the closest one to her, and usually the spouse is the first person they look at, that they would not allow him to collect these supplements, that investigators would come in the home, have a warrant maybe if they needed it, and search and take what they want to try to figure out who intentionally poisoned Mary Yoder. But that's not what happened. Bill collected them. crazy. And he didn't drive it straight to them because this call was on the 17th. He held on to this box of supplements he decided to put in a box, right? So we don't know if any got left out until the 24th. And then he brought it to the office. And it wasn't because he was working. That's not why it took him a week to bring it there, because he didn't return to work until October. So why did he hold on to this box of supplements for an entire week? The office that he needed to bring it to was only about 54 miles away. So, and then it was not until October 26th, so about 5 weeks after learning that it was colchicine that killed Mary, that Bill finally spoke with the medical examiner investigator. That was about 3 months after Mary's death. Prior to this, all communication was with the daughter. Now, we're going to stop there for now. There's a lot more that Bill says. There are some things that I'm not even going to bother bringing up because it's just silly questioning, a lot of repetitive questions as well. You know, when you're on the stand and you get cross-examined, and this is his entire testimony on the stand. So there'll be a lot of things that are repeated. We can skip over that type of stuff. And then, so in the next episode, what I'm going to do is I'll finish off this first trial, and then we'll go into the second trial, and I'll point out to you the things that were the same that he said and things that were different or what have you. With Adam, there was actually several things that he changed from the first trial to the second trial. And I say this because there was one really, really big one in there, and that was that, Kaitlyn Conley had suffered a ectopic pregnancy, and he said that the night that he found out about this, that she lost the baby, not lost the baby, but she had an ectopic pregnancy, was the first time he had heard about her being pregnant. And he was upset because he, it was like he just lost the kid that he never knew he was even having. Yet in the second trial, he did know. He said it. He knew about this child. As a matter of fact, there was text messages about them. So that's a huge oopsie. You know what I'm saying? Why did you lie about that? That's a big story change. Very big story change. So I'm going to be looking for the same thing with Bill. Like, I'm going to go through my notes of what I found in the first trial, and I'm going to be looking for things in the second trial that changed or conflict what was said in the first trial. So until next time, I'll see you soon.